The all-time most respected UFC fighters. When the UFC started in 1993, nobody knew what to expect. Would good fights be held? Would fans come out to see them? Turns out the answer is yes. And over the next 2.5 decades, hundreds of fighters have entered the UFC's famous octagon to fight for gold and glory. Today, more than 100 fighters have accomplished that feat. But who's the best of them all? Be sure to stick around to find out who this legend is. Number 10. Frank Shamrock. Known by most as a UFC Hall of Famer, Frank Shamrock is considered one of their greatest pound-for-pound fighters. After an exceptional career in Japan, Shamrock was signed by the UFC and quickly made his presence felt. In his debut, he took out Olympic gold medalist Kevin Jackson in 16 seconds to win the UFC's first ever middleweight title. His second defense was even more impressive. Shamrock knocked Igor Zinoviev out cold in just 22 seconds, at a time when the middleweight division had a weight limit of 200 pounds and Shamrock weighed around 185. Number 9. BJ Penn. BJ Penn burst onto the MMA scene in 2001, defeating 3 opponents to become the #1 contender in his weight class. But he lost his first shot at a championship title, losing to Jens Pulver in a close decision. And his second attempt ended in another frustrating draw, with Kaoru Uno still holding on to his title. After returning from a break in 2006, his first opponent was Pulver, who he defeated using a rear naked choke, and from there he began a winning streak of 16 fights against Joe Stevenson, Kenny Florian, and Diego Sanchez, becoming recognized as one of the pound-for-pound best fighters in MMA history. Number 8. Amanda Nunes. If this were a list of only female UFC fighters, Amanda Nunes would easily be at the top of the list as the greatest of all time. The Lioness is one of only 4 UFC fighters to hold UFC titles in 2 different weight classes at the same time, and she has defeated 6 former UFC champions. Nunes went up to 145 pounds to battle defending UFC featherweight title holder Chris Cyborg after successful defenses against previous champion Ronda Rousey, future UFC flyweight champion Valentina Shevchenko, and top contender Raquel Pennington. Nunes simply ran over Cyborg, defeating her with a series of punches in 51 seconds, despite the fact that she had not lost a fight in 13 years. It was a sensational victory that demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt who the world's best female fighter was. Since then, Nunes has successfully defended her UFC bantamweight and featherweight belts, defeating former UFC champions Holly Holm and Germaine de Randamie. Number 7. Henry Cejudo. Henry Cejudo was predicted to be a great MMA fighter even before he made his UFC debut. In 2013, The Messenger, an Olympic freestyle wrestling gold medalist in 2008, made his MMA debut. He was signed by the UFC 1 year after going 6-0 on the regional circuit. Cejudo defeated Dustin Kimura, Chris Carriazo, Chico Camus, and Jussier Formiga in his first 4 UFC fights, but it was arguably too soon for him to challenge UFC flyweight champion Demetrious Johnson. Cejudo was stopped in the first round by TKO, which was expected. Later that year, he resurfaced as a far better fighter, with an outstanding striking game to go along with his world-class wrestling. He did just that at UFC 238, coming from behind to destroy highly ranked contender Marlon Moraes and become only the 4th fighter in UFC history to hold 2 titles at the same time. Cejudo then added to his history in 2020 when he became the first person to stop renowned former UFC bantamweight champion Dominick Cruz via TKO. Number 6. Demetrious Johnson. Throughout his time in the UFC, Demetrious Mighty Mouse Johnson, the flyweight champion from 2012 to 2018, was regarded as a pound-for-pound icon. Johnson, who is currently fighting for ONE FC in Singapore, still holds the record for most successful UFC title defenses, 11, and concluded his UFC career with a 15-2-1 record. Mighty Mouse lowered to 125 pounds after defeating Ian McCall and Joseph Benavidez, and Johnson became the UFC's first flyweight champion. He knocked out Henry Cejudo and Benavidez in a rematch, as well as Ray Borg, Wilson Reese, and Kyoji Horiguchi, the last being the most recent submission in UFC history when Horiguchi was forced to tap with only a second left in the 5th round. Number 5. Daniel Cormier. Daniel Cormier had beautiful gloves earlier in 2020 when making a really fantastic record. Daniel Cormier concluded his career with 22 wins and 4 losses, with 2 of these defeats being extremely controversial. Cormier's MMA career began in 2009 and came off the rear of an extremely roaring career as a race scrapper that had culminated in spots within the U.S. national team at the 2004 and 2008 athletic competition. Cormier entered the UFC in 2013 as the ruling Strikeforce heavyweight champion, a title he'd won by defeating extremely highly ranked opponents Antonio Bigfoot Silva and Josh Barnett. DC also defeated Frank Mir and Roy Nelson before dropping to 205 pounds so he could face Jon Jones for the UFC light heavyweight title. Cormier claimed his initial UFC light heavyweight title by beating Anthony Johnson at UFC 187 and defended it against Alexander Gustafsson and Johnson during a rematch. Number 4. Anderson Silva. When Anderson Silva won the UFC middleweight title in 2006, his reign would last for 7 years, the longest in UFC history, and includes 16 consecutive victories. The Brazilian also jumped up to light heavyweight and defeated James Irvin and former UFC light heavyweight champion Forrest Griffin. In 2013, Anderson Silva finally lost to Chris Weidman at UFC 162. Number 3. Jon Jones. In a world without USADA and drug testing, there'd positively be a good claim for Jon Jones to be at the top of this list. After all, he's been with the UFC for over a decade, has solely ever lost a fight via disqualification, and has overwhelmed a laundry list of legends in devastating fashion throughout his time with the promotion. Jon Bones Jones has had a really unbelievable career with the UFC. He debuted within the promotion as a hot prospect in 2008 and quickly blew through all of his early opponents to be recognized as a title challenger within the latter part of 2010. Once he picked up his 6th UFC victory against Ryan Bader in February 2011, it had been clear that he was prepared for a run at the highest level. Jones's next fight saw him dismantle UFC light heavyweight champion Mauricio Shogun Rua to claim the gold, and from there he continued to clear out the light heavyweight division. Number 2. Khabib Nurmagomedov. The former UFC lightweight champion may have retired, but his shadow still looms over the UFC's 155-pound division. It's likely that until he's been gone for a few years, whoever wears the belt won't feel quite like the real champion. That's a straightforward mark of Khabib's greatness. By 2012, the Eagle already had an amazing record of 16-0, and by 2013, he'd inflated that to 21-0 and was ready for a title shot. Injuries restricted him for a few years, fighting only 4 times between 2014 and 2017, but he still continued to win, even against top-ranked folks like Rafael dos Anjos and Michael Johnson. By 2018, it was clear that he was ready for a title shot. An injured Tony Ferguson was replaced by Al Iaquinta, with the Eagle winning by unanimous decision. Following up with major wins and title defenses over Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, and Justin Gaethje, there was little question that he was the most effective lightweight in UFC history. In October of 2020, Khabib retired with a perfect record of 29 wins and 0 losses, making him the UFC's second greatest fighter. Number 1. George St-Pierre. George Rush St-Pierre, popularly known as GSP, is the number 1 fighter on our top 10 list. Khabib Nurmagomedov has a higher win total. Jon Jones and Anderson Silva each finished a number of their opponents. Daniel Cormier, Amanda Nunes, and Henry Cejudo held 2 UFC titles at the same time. But despite this, none of those greats will rise to the legendary status of George St-Pierre because he's the greatest UFC fighter of all time. Over a 15-year professional fighting career with a record of 29-2, GSP faced the best welterweights from around the world. Although he suffered 2 bitter defeats, one to Matt Hughes and one to Matt Serra, each time he bounced back from his losses as a stronger fighter and avenged the defeats in rematches. St-Pierre's initial title shot came in 2004 when the Canadian had a record of 2-0 within the UFC. He lost by armbar to Matt Hughes. St-Pierre bounced back with victories over Jason Mayhem Miller, Frank Trigg, Sean Shirk, and BJ Penn. All amazing fighters fell to the Canadian. In 2006, George St-Pierre got a rematch with Matt Hughes and won by TKO, winning the welterweight title. An upset loss to Matt Serra followed, but again St-Pierre bounced back. He rescued his title from Matt Serra in early 2008 and then went on one of the most dominant runs in UFC history, defending his title 9 times. Finally, in 2013, after a title defense against Johnny Hendricks, George St-Pierre retired, ending one of the most dominant reigns in UFC welterweight history. Who do you think is missing from the list? Drop your comments below.